The story is called Every Young Man's Dream. Shortly after ordination, Bishop Rogers spoke about boundaries in interpersonal relationships to us new ordinands. Concerning sexual impropriety, he remarked that nobody suddenly finds himself in bed with someone else. There are plenty of warning signs, sense the relationship is special, that the couple need to spend time alone together, and that the relationship becomes private and is kept secret from other people. Bishop Rogers' advice came back to me vividly when I was involved with counselling Beth, not her real name, as a prison chaplain. Beth was serving 2 years less a day for sexual assault. She'd had unlawful sexual intercourse with a minor. Her story was a textbook example of what the bishop had talked about. It's long enough ago that I feel I can now tell Beth's story with a few details withheld to ensure the privacy of those concerned. The verbatim quotations from Beth are of course a reconstruction, because I never take notes when I'm with a client. Beth had a very conventional upbringing. Loving parents in a home in suburbia, straight A student in high school, captain of the girls' soccer team. After university, she took a job at a major bank, initially as a teller. There she met Kyle, who had been hired into the management stream. An uneventful courtship followed. 2 years after they first met, there was an idyllic beachside wedding ceremony in Cuba. The honeymoon suite at the resort was replete with flowers, chocolates and champagne, and everything in the lovemaking department was perfect, she mused contentedly. With 2 incomes, Beth and Kyle could afford the down payment on a condo downtown. The bank offered its employees a favourable mortgage rate. Kyle enrolled to train as a private banker, a job that would involve advising wealthier clients about strategies to maximise their investment portfolios. The program inevitably required a good deal of study, and Kyle had to work on case studies and assignments most evenings. About this time, Beth's love life became no longer up to snuff. Kyle's work-related studies seemed to be taking longer and longer each night. By the time that Kyle rolled into bed, she was already asleep. Or, if she had stayed awake in anticipation of lovemaking, he seemed to be too tired to be interested. One night, however, having forgotten the book she planned to read herself to sleep with, she crossed over into the living room computer room combination where she'd left it on the coffee table, being quiet so as not to disturb Kyle at his studies. I just couldn't believe what I saw. The computer screen was filled with the image of a very well-stacked and very naked woman, and Kyle had his pants open and was masturbating. I said, and I know this sounds pretty banal, "What on earth are you doing, Kyle?" He turned round, obviously embarrassed, and tried to stuff his penis back into his pants, as if I wouldn't notice. "So that's why you're always too tired to make love to me when you come to bed. You'd rather jerk off with porno movies." It became pretty obvious this wasn't just a one-off event. Kyle was addicted to porn. It made me feel so ashamed. There was no one I could talk to. You don't just tell your friends or your parents that your husband's addicted to porn. It made me feel I must have been a failure as a wife and lover for him to want the porn more than he wanted me. But at the same time I was really angry and I started to despise him. I couldn't bring myself to utter his name when I spoke to him. We spoke less and less, and in my mind I used to refer to him as the private wanker, like private bankers, see? What you might call the road to perdition came from a most wholesome and unexpected source. Beth had, as was mentioned earlier, a keen interest in soccer. But after university there was no outlet for this pursuit. There were simply no women's teams. So Beth took up coaching and became the assistant coach for a team in an under-17 house league. She and Kyle had been campers before the days of the private wanker. They purchased a second-hand minivan, and Beth volunteered to take 2 or 3 of the players home after the games. One of these was a kid named Matt. Matt's parents had built a large house 2 or 3 miles out of town. Because of the location of the soccer field, Matt's house was her last stop. Matt was a decent soccer player, not great, not nerdy, but very serious. Out of interest, Beth asked all her kids what they planned to do next year in high school and what they thought they might do afterwards. One day when they were on the last leg of the journey, Matt was quite choked up that Beth had taken this interest in him. "You know, Beth," he said, "you're the only person who ever talks to me like you're listening. Father's out till all hours at work, and at weekends he's off with his golf buddies. Mother spends all her time with her bridge club and yoga, and some hug a tree activists in the evening. It's like I don't exist." After this, Matt and I started to have a check-in time with each other before I dropped him off. He told me he'd like to study computer engineering at university if he could get in. He even told me there was a girl at school he was kind of interested in, but he was pretty shy and he hadn't asked her for a date in case she rejected him. I couldn't exactly tell him about my troubles with a private wanker, so I kept things limited to how things were going at work, what we planned to do with the condo, and whether we'd be going on vacation this year. At first I just drew up the car outside Matt's house while we talked, but after a while it seemed more convenient to stop for our check-in at a pull-off that was the entrance to the county forest, a mile or two from his house. It also seemed more cosy. One very hot and humid evening in late July, we were on our way home from a game. We stopped for our check-in as usual. I was talking to Matt and twisting my wedding band round my finger while I did so. Suddenly fell off and fell on the floor mat. I leaned down to pick it up, and as I straightened back up, I noticed that Matt was looking straight down the halter top I was wearing. I said, "Do you like what you see?" I meant it to come out kind of sarcastically, but accidentally it came out more sort of throaty and husky. Matt curled up right to the roots of his hair, but said, yes, all under his breath in a whisper, "I don't know what got into me." I said, "Would you like to see some more?" And I pulled out my halter top down to show him. Like I said, I don't know what got into me. It's not as if I'm stacked, and I wasn't 16. I thought Matt's eyes were going to come out on stalks. I can see that there was more than a bit of pressure in his pants, and even that I knew he was wearing a jockstrap. I know this sounds crazy, but it was hot and humid, like I said. I could smell the sweat on him from the game, and I was flat out horny and frustrated on account of the PW. I just grabbed his crotch and felt the pressure increase under me. Next thing I know, I'm undoing the drawstring of his soccer shorts, pulling them down, pulling his penis up over his jock. Boy, after all that time with no sex, it looked good. It felt good and it smelled good. One good look just to make sure it was real, and I had him in my mouth. It was a bit awkward afterwards. I mean, what do you say when you've just blown a kid of 16? So I sat up, straightened out my halter top, opened the driver's door and spat him out. I was amazed at what happened next. This kid's only 16, remember? He obviously realised how embarrassed I was. He took my hand, looked at me and said, "Wow, Beth, you were just great." Then I drove him home. There was another game the next week. I didn't know how I was going to face Matt, or whether he'd want to ride home with me. Once I dropped off the other kids, I was real nervous, and I said, "Do you want to have a check-in?" He nodded and said, "Yeah." And I decided that what had happened had to be a one-off. I asked him if he'd had a good week, the usual stuff, but he surprised me by saying, "I thought about you all week, Beth. I know you're older than me and all that, but I really think you're beautiful. Not only that, but you're the only one I can talk to, like really talk." I was so touched that I was all teary-eyed, and then it all came out. Trouble with the PW and how lonely I felt. Stuff I should never have laid on a 16-year-old, but I just couldn't help it. I cried and we hugged. He kissed me very gently, laid his hand on my breast on the outside, so I moved his hand in. We stayed like that for ages, maybe 10 minutes. It started to get dark. I suppose what happened next was sort of inevitable. It was 2 weeks before there was another game. This time we both knew what was going to happen, or at least the general drift. When Matt said to me, Within stopping for a check-in, there was a tone to his voice that gave the words check-in a sort of double entendre. I laughed before I said, sure, if you'd like to. By now it was well into August and dusk fell earlier. So when we stopped for the check-in, I said to Matt, try to get in the back where there's more room. So here am I, 28 years old, seducing a 16-year-old. It was a full meal deal. Both had our shorts right down to our ankles, and I had his hand in my wetness so it slipped right in. I pulled Matt down on top of me to guide him in. I steadied with him, not too fast, not too fast. I can feel he's just about ready to explode. There's a knock on the window and a flashing light in my eyes, and a voice says, OPP, can I see your driver's license, ma'am? You know, as I look back on it, my main regret is that the OPP can turn up 2 minutes later. That was a really nice kid. Matthew responds. I've been a volunteer with the local branch of the John Howard Society for many years. So I wasn't surprised when my wife Julie gave me a copy of Memoirs of the Prison Chaplain when it came out last year. Was I ever surprised when one of the stories was an account of my affair, if that's what you want to call it, with Beth all those years ago. In fact, it's more than 20 years. I've been happily married to Julie for over a decade, and we've got 2 children in grade school. I still feel a certain tightness in my underwear when I think back of the events of that summer, especially when I read about them. The account of those long ago events in Memoirs was essentially as I remember them, with one significant exception. The OPP didn't arrive before the act was completed. I think Beth needed to spare herself one final humiliation, even when she unburdened herself to the prison chaplain. We did indeed climb into the back of the minivan that fateful night, but after some kissing and fumbling, Beth turned to me and said very quietly, Matt, I really want you. I don't have anyone else. Will you have me? Then she started to cry. I don't remember what I thought of it then, but looking back now I can see how lonely and vulnerable she was. I hope being so young I didn't disappoint her. When it was over, we lay together for a long time with her stroking my face and saying, thank you, Matt, over and over again. I attended the trial, of course, Beth pleading guilty, so I didn't have to testify. I don't think her husband even attended. At least there was no one that looked as if he might have been her husband there. Of course, there was a whole raft of press for such a salacious trial. Things were even frosty and unusual at home, with mother and father going on about the shame I'd brought on the family, how obvious it was that Beth was a whore. They wanted me to make a victim impact statement at the sentencing hearing, but I refused. I've often wondered what became of Beth. She'd be almost 50 by now. I really hope she found someone to love her the way that Julie loves me. Beth was very decent and kind to me, the way she took an interest in me, in my hopes and dreams, when mother and father were too busy or not interested. Our so-called affair only happened because she was so lonely in her marriage and so starved for love. But even in that respect, Beth taught me in that one offering of herself, be gentle and caring in love, and consider always the needs of your lover as well as your own. I think she's contributed to the success of my marriage to Julie. Even after all these years, I still think of her.